Imagine being a young person and making a decision to serve your country in the military. And off you go to training, and off you go to deployment in an active duty scenario. It is the experience that many young men and women have had in our armed forces in recent years. And we're going to talk tonight about the effects likely of trauma and managing that in the training concerns that they have, and upon return home, what happens. So welcome to Through a Therapist's Eyes. I am Chris Gazdick, and he is Craig Graves. I am a mental health and substance abuse therapist, having a book available soon. I need to stop. Mr. Neal, I figured out why I say rediscovering instead of re-understanding, right? Because I have it written right here in front of me, rediscovering. They changed the name, and I never changed it on this thing, and it's just like a psychological thing. It's re-understanding emotions and becoming your best self. I figured out why I do that. Anyway, Mr. Craig Graves is an unbeatable mind coach, and we welcome you to the Through a Therapist's Eyes podcast. You can find him at his website, wininyourmind.com. We invite you to see the world through the lens of a therapist and a coach, being aware not the delivery of therapy services in any way. And we invite you to check out our website, throughatherapist'seyes.com, where you get full show transcriptions, capability of buying the books that we talk about on show. We do get a little bit of a financial receipt from that when you do that, so it's a way to keep the show free for all. And we also have a BetterHelp.com per partnership that we are supporting as well. So this is the human emotional experience. Mr. Graves, I believe we should figure this thing out together. Are you willing to do that, man?
Let's do it.
All right. Listen, this is a show that actually had its orientation in my mind really a long time ago. And it's kind of one of those things where, getting guests on the shows and organization challenge sometimes, with schedules and just kind of keeping it in the mindset of people and all. And the reality of it is, I talked to somebody a couple years ago, and I was actually at a funeral from my wife's family, and I met a guy and there that had married into her family, and we had that in common. So we were just chit chatting, talking, chewing the fat, And born was the genesis. Then born was this episode. Soldiers' thoughts on mental health treatment in the VA, how they're effectively not treated essentially in the mental health system, and also just his experiences. And so we got kind of a bit of a snafu, Craig, and scheduling or whatever happened, and we decided to go ahead with the show kind of without our guest. But I am going to share a quote from him and talk about our experience a little bit and my experience of, working with soldiers throughout the years. So that's kind of what's on tap tonight, because we knew a long time ago, Craig, when really going all the way back to Bush, right? Isn't that who wasn't the president years and years and years ago with Iraq wars and stuff?
Yeah, 20 years ago.
Yeah, we were prepared as an industry. It was when I was younger in newer in the field, and I remember people talking about, get ready, because they're all coming home, and we really geared up for that and needed to, because we're still really dealing with that. A lot of men and women have come back from Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation, what was the other one, Shock and Awe, and all those things back then in 91, moving forward with the different functions that we've had. And, and so this show is dealing with a lot of those things. First of all, thank you to all the veterans, men and women out there serving in the armed forces. We appreciate you and cannot comprehend those that haven't, served what you do for us. And I, for one, will say I'm very grateful to you. And I can really say, in the way of, the Marines, man, I'm super honored to know two young men. Craig, I haven't even talked to you about it, I don't think. One of which I think you know. My nephew, Johnny Grace, just went into and graduated from with the Marines and is now in active duty. So, Mr. Grace out there, man, I appreciate what you're doing. It's an honor to follow you and to know you, and I thank you for going to do that for us. And then secondly, man, I got Mr. Noah Jordan. We have a common friend. His dad is Joe Jordan, and Noah very recently just graduated, having done the Crucible in the Marines, and I got to talk to him on the phone not more than a week or two ago. So I appreciate you as well, young man. Thank you, Mr. Jordan, for doing what you're doing. It's really, 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 really cool to know two people that just did this that are really pretty close to me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Marine Corps, man. That's hardcore.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Marine Corps is unique, and they're like a brotherhood, man.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a Marine, dude, I guess if you're any kind of soldier, you're always a soldier. But there's something unique about the Marine Corps, man.
I think so. I've learned that, and not to downgrade any other disciplines or
no,
branches,
I'm not doing
of
that
course.
either. Yeah, I'm not doing that either.
But yeah, it is. My sister-in-law actually kind of made some comments to that effect. She was in a different branch, and she's, they really bond together. I mean, the hoorah thing and really leaning on each other, relying on each other, and I mean it's a community.
Yeah, definitely is.
Very strong community.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I believe that our guy that I had mentioned before, and I'm going to respect his name and whatnot, definitely keep that out. But and I want to make this qualifier up front as well. Okay, so instead of having somebody be able to share their personal experiences and whatnot, what I'm going to kind of attempt to do tonight, Craig, is kind of talk about the experiences I've had working with the men and women in the military, just kind of through my eyes. So I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about any one individual. I'm not talking about anyone specifically. I'm really talking generally tonight about, what I have had people, help me understand as experienced. And I also want to make sure too, from the get-go, I'm not a military expert. I have not served myself. I just had the distinct honor and privilege to work with many men and women. And, I can't tell you how honored I am and respectful I am about when I have the opportunity, to do that. So that's where I'm coming from tonight. But he had a quote that really caught my eye in that conversation, what seems like so long ago. And part of what we're talking about tonight is, the way soldiers are treated or not treated. Because the suicide rates are awful. I wasn't planning on this, but I'm gonna start off with part of what the terrible tragedy that we have here. Anyone who listens to the show knows we're not a statistics show, but this is kind of the concern that people have, active and retired from the military. Craig, this is crazy. Listen to this. 1,455 military personnel committed suicide from 2005 to 2011. That's too many. One's too many, but that's crazy. From 2006 to 2011, the rates were highest among Army personnel. 19.13 to 29.44 cases per 100,000. Among studies with a known cause of death, 62% were attributed to firearms. The results of this study also suggest that among Army personnel or Marines who committed suicide, those with infantry or special operations jobs classifications were more likely than those in non-infantry positions to use firearm. So that's, listen, this bothers me, honestly, to a certain extent. That bothers me. And that's, I think, part of why I feel so honored to work with people, when we're dealing with these things, because it's real. Like, I've seen this. I've been eyeball to eyeball with it, with people that are, retired from the military and dealing with this long term. And, part of what I think, I'll be honest with, my intent tonight is to make a dent in that. And so, honestly, if there's anybody out there listening that's got these thoughts, it's just very common thoughts, share them. Go get help. Like, talk about that. Don't let that be alone in your head.
Yeah, soldier or not.
Correct. Absolutely correct. I learned this early on, Craig. It is so crazy to, gain and garner the respect of people that have dealt with trauma, sexual trauma, domestic violence trauma of all sorts. But, people come into a therapy room and they're sharing things that they've never shared with anyone before. I mean, that's pretty big. It's pretty humbling. I can't begin to describe, words to describe that. So, okay, all of that stuff. So the quote here. The thing that caught my eye that we talked about, and I think this was the gentleman's quote, not mine. It's hard to remember, but I'm going to definitely give him credit because it caught my ear when he must have said it. Check this out, Mr. Graves. Soldiers are suicidal due to not being treated, not because of how they're treated. And I thought that was very poignant in the experience of people coming home and dealing with the emotional turmoil that we have when we have those types of experiences sometimes. More on that in a minute.
Yeah, that's a great quote, but that's not news to me, dude. I think that people love our soldiers. I think that when the soldiers came home from Vietnam, it was a different story. But we seem to revere our service members today, as we should. And even those poor guys from Vietnam should have been given the red carpet treatment when they got home too. But yeah, my understanding is they can't get treatment at the VA, and that's the problem.
It's funny. When I say treatment, my clinical brain is thinking mental health treatment.
Is it not that?
It is. Well, yes, it is that. It's part of what I heard you started to say is the way we treated people when they came home, meaning how we acted towards them, how we accepted them,
okay,
how
so
we
you're
went.
saying
Right,
that it's not the way that they are treated by therapists. It's that they're not treated by therapists.
Right.
Okay, I thought you were kind of using a play on words there.
No, and I'm glad you caught that because that is,
Yeah, because like I said, soldiers coming home from Vietnam were treated poorly.
And let me tell you something too that
treated
catches
poorly by people.
Okay. And I'm glad we went in this little back and forth, and here's why. Because to characterize the conversation that me and this gentleman had a couple years ago when this show was born in my mind, we were talking a lot also about training, military training, and the way that people are experiencing their training in the actual military and how it has changed. The sentiment is that it has changed to the poor, to the bad, so that people are being treated differently. Here's a quote from a different guy, and I don't even remember who this is, honestly. But I must have told him I'll credit him as JT. So a quote from JT says that, quote unquote, mamas and chaplains run the Corps now, right? Mamas and chaplains.
What does that mean?
Well, just the idea that, for instance, they talked about a stress card being used. So when a new recruit is being trained and they're being broken down and whatnot, they can hold a stress card up, and they get a break. You should see Craig's eyes right now.
You're kidding me, right?
No, that's what I was told. That's what I was told, and it's just it doesn't make sense to me. When I was talking to them, I was kind of stunned, like your eyes just rose, and like yeah, and so the sentiment is that people are not really able to be broken down. As you know how it goes. You break people down, you build them up, and that kind of thing. It's part of the training, right? So that explains a little bit more about what his quote was. Soldiers are suicidal due to not being treated, not because of how they're treated. Meaning, let's train these guys. That's a little bit of an issue that we have, quite possibly, in the military. Now, again, I'm not a military expert. I don't think you are either.
That just blows my mind, dude. I mean, combat has got to be the hardest thing on earth, right?
Yeah,
what
it's hard to qualify.
What are you going to do in battle? Oh, stop shooting. I've got my stress card up.
Yeah. No, obviously.
Chris, I am certain that the Russians and the Chinese and the Taliban and all those enemies of ours are not holding up stress cards in training when things get rough. You know what I mean, dude?
No, I do. I agree. To be honest with you, not being a military professional, or an expert rather, it honestly struck me in talking with them because it's hard for me to believe. It's hard for me to fathom that to some extent that has begun to be the norm. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's almost not believable to me.
That's unbelievable to me. It really is. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't give those guys tools to help them handle stressful situations, but holding up a stress card? Are you nuts? That's crazy.
Yeah, I thought so. And maybe that's not currently being done. I can tell you that's not being done in the Marines. I know that. I asked the question.
What branch is he talking about?
I'm not sure, and I'm not going to go much further.
Well, you said the Corps. Mamas and chaplains run the Corps now.
That was a different one. JT had kind of said that. Well, no, yeah, it was the same conversation. Maybe so. I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not, an expert on that, and nor do we probably need to be talking about, what, specific training things are, because that's for them to do and other people's expertise. But the point majorly being, military personnel are not being treated, and how they're being trained isn't about the suicide rates. It's about not having mental health treatment, adequate mental health treatment. And I'll tell you another thought that I was talking with somebody, because I wanted to back myself up with this episode on people that, have served and whatnot. And I have a professional colleague. He's been on the show before, and he suggested it was okay to talk about this, to emphasize the reality of what happens, in these realities. He was really making the point that oftentimes in the VA, when you get treatment, they do a lot of very excellent, good work with men and women, kind of getting information out and doing groups and understanding insight development, with information and whatnot. But it's kind of the surface level. It's not like, I'm able to go individually on a deep level, your personal experiences, how we managed it, what you experience now, deep level connections between all of that. And I think for who knows whatever reason, maybe it's just because they're overwhelmed with so many numbers or whatever, but he made the point in his experience that that's not quite what happens. So the VA is great for a lot of things. It's just not, great all the way around. And we've probably due to a lot of focus, made some improvements, but we got a long way to go is probably the main point there.
We got a long way to go. The war started in 2001, and it's 2020.
Yeah, good point.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I'm kind of speechless. Thank you for that, because that's really true. That's really true. So let's be aware. Let's have some consciousness about this and begin dealing with it, because this is a dramatic impact on. A little teaser. Next show, we're going to be talking about how to talk to your loved one and how to interact with your loved one, how to manage a relationship with your loved one that has, some sort of trauma experience, because this affects that person and that family and our community, all told, by not dealing with traumatic realities in a good, solid treatment method. And the sad thing is, we know how to do it, because the war happened long ago, called the Vietnam War, when we learned a whole lot about PTSD, And so, yeah, we can do better. We need to do better. I don't think we have a choice. It has been longer than 20 years. So, okay, what is PTSD? We've talked about trauma on the show a lot before. I wanted to give a little bit of a rundown on kind of understanding, what it is, and then from my experience in talking to people, real specifics on how people experience this, because it is something that is oftentimes by that soldier not talked about. Like I said, they minimize, they hide. You may never even know that they're experiencing these things, and a lot of them are. Also, a good point to be made that not all are, right? This is for somebody that is experiencing these things, and a lot of people do go through a traumatic event and don't have the PTSD. Why, you might ask? You might be curious about that?
Yeah, I'm interested to know that. Why
Right?
some people experience it and some don't.
Because that's the truth. I mean, you take a unit of 10 people and they all experience the same thing. Not all 10 people have PTSD, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the big connectors to that is a predating experience with anxiety. It may be completely unbeknownst to the person, because people can live a lifetime with having anxiety conditions full-blown and not know it. I see that all the time in my office too. I'm helping to develop insight with people and they didn't even know. So if you have anxiety or think that you do, we want to be aware of that. We want to be extra cautious of that. But other than that, as a little bit of a factor, I don't think we really know. It has a lot to do with brain chemistry and the way that the amygdala starts getting locked in and on trigger fire, if you will. And that's where we begin to get, real developing problems with people that's hard to cope with, and where suicides come from.
Do you think it has anything to do with the training that the soldiers receive while in the military? And for example, so like in the special operations community, I know there's PTSD in the special operations community, but some of those guys, man, you hear about Navy SEALs and Rangers and guys like that who've been deploying for like 13 years, man.
Right.
They've got hundreds and hundreds of combat missions under their belt.
Yeah.
And they just keep going back.
Yeah.
And maybe they're phased. Maybe they do have some post-traumatic stress going on. I don't know. But they continue to put themselves in that kind of situation. And the point is, those Spec Ops guys have lots more training than just your average Army guy, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think it has anything to do with the way they're trained in the military? Now, not being military guys, we don't know about their training specifically, but
the answer is no.
What are your thoughts?
The answer is no.
Think so?
Speaking from these gentlemen that I spoke with, a couple of years ago, and my experience in working with men and women in the military, that's the quote, right? Soldiers are suicidal due to not being treated, meaning mental health treatment, not because of how they're treated, meaning the way they're trained. No. That's not as much of a factor. Look, what the biggest factor is, Craig, I think that people need to understand, when you experience a traumatic event, anyone, across the board, all of us, we will have a reaction to that. That's just going to happen. It's supposed to. Your amygdala fires, and you're in a fight or flight state. You get adrenaline dumps. Sean McGinnis talked with us about this, with police officers and stuff. They get traumatic event after traumatic event after traumatic event, sometimes multiple events in one shift. So you're going to have your body reacting to that. And if we don't know how to manage that on a mental health perspective, then you're in trouble. And if you don't know how to manage that from a mental health perspective, and it happens year 1, year 2, year 3 of a long career, well, then you're going to have more of an impact. That's just what we know that's the case. Now, that's every single man and woman and child with a traumatic event. Step that up a little bit, there is something called acute stress disorder. And that's basically PTSD light. So it's the same sort of symptoms, it's just not as many of them and not as intense. So I look at this as a continuum. We're all going to have a reaction, okay? Some of us have mild or moderate problems. Some of us have severe, and some of us have what you could call super severe when we're experiencing a traumatic event. And that's just in the military. That's just everywhere, every kind of traumatic event.
So you're saying it's more of an individual kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Not exactly random, but, we really would have very, very difficult time doing any kind of if you want to do like a screening for police officers or first responders or military professionals and say, oh, you failed the screening because the psychological test said you're going to develop PTSD. We do not have that. I don't think we can develop anywhere close to anything like that. And that's what needs to be made clear.
Got it.
Makes sense. So symptoms to look out for, there are 4 main kind of clusters. There's re-experiencing stuff, that you experienced before and you revisit those things. The AMA kind of talks about it as being intrusion realities, intrusive thoughts or intrusive memories. Second is avoidant patterns of behavior. Third is a hyperarousal, meaning your body is literally hopped up particularly when you get triggered. And the last one is alterations in arousal and negative thoughts and feedback, rather. So hyperarousal, negative thoughts and beliefs, avoidance, and re-experiencing things. So a lot of people think of the re-experience or the intrusive thoughts or the intrusive memories, the flashback in nightmare and night terrors and dreams. I mean, that's what they think of with PTSD, and that is a part of it, but that's not all of it. The avoidance happens when people are trying to avoid the stimulus. They avoid anything that they can associate that might make them think of, what they went through, what their trauma was, what the scenes were. Sexual trauma victims will really deal with sex problems when they're older. or particular sexual acts and whatnot, right? Because it reminds you of that. Who would want to do something that reminds you, of what you went through, or triggers a big reaction? Hyperarousal, occurs. I remember my high school teacher, chemistry teacher, actually. If he's ever listening out there, man, he was my favorite teacher. We all loved him. If we would go snap your hands or slap a book down, I think, dude, he's literally jumping. His body goes into a hyperarousal state, and he's taking cover. It's a startle reaction. You've heard of that before. And then lastly, negative thoughts and beliefs. I mean, it's a hard time, dealing with the psychological experiences with these memories and stuff. And you have basically depression. Basically depression. You're sad. You're unmotivated. You don't understand why you don't have this energy, and it's just because this trauma is a constant drag on you. And here's the thing that sucks, Craig. When this is the case and you're experiencing these things, military professionals and anybody who's had trauma or having anything kind of going on in your heart this way, if you don't deal with it, it doesn't just go away. Make a dramatic point there, right? Like, if this isn't treated, it doesn't get better. It doesn't go away. If it is treated, it does.
Yeah.
Like, we can mitigate these things.
So you can't. Yeah, I'm curious as to how you treat it. So I'm looking at the notes. I'm going to jump back real quick, and maybe we'll come back to this. But down here, where you say this gentleman, his fear is that soldiers are not allowed to be broken down anymore out of the fear of high suicide rates. So are people who haven't been to war committing suicide as well? Or just soldiers who have been in combat situations in Afghanistan and in Iraq?
That's a good question. It is an individual experience of trauma that we're talking about. So you would kind of think, oh yeah, only infantry people, and the statistics we talked about said that, right? Well, you might be a cook in Kuwait, way behind the lines, managing files and whatnot, but you are constantly in theater. You are constantly knowing of the attacks. You are constantly on alarm, and you may have PTSD experiences just from that. Honestly, you don't have to be, in a roadside bomb. You don't have to be, in the thick of the Vietnam bush, with bullets flying, right?
Yeah, and I understand that. But
Okay.
But up here in your notes, you say he spoke of stress cards used in training for new recruits who could hold it up when they needed a break. And then down here, he says soldiers are not allowed to be broken down anymore out of the fear of high suicide rates. So the question I have is, are military personnel who haven't been overseas killing themselves at these high rates like you have documented down below?
I don't know about rates. I don't know if I'm going to be able to adequately answer that, to be honest with you, Craig. What I can say is, in my office and in my relationship with people, I see the suicidal thoughts, whether or not they served in one sort of capacity or the other, really doesn't matter, because they're experiencing what they're experiencing, and they're disabled because of it.
Yeah, but I guess, are you seeing patients in your office who haven't deployed overseas who are suicidal? Because that's what it sounds like he's saying here.
Oh, okay.
Is you can throw up this card in basic training because you're too stressed out.
Yeah.
And he's afraid that.
No, I think the answer to the question is no.
The answer,
Yeah.
Okay, so
not
people who haven't been overseas are not.
Yeah, generally, okay. I think what you're asking is, do you get PTSD because you went off to basic training or something?
Right.
Like that.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
No.
Okay.
No, not so much.
Okay.
I think at least I can anecdotally say I have never seen that.
And I know our guest didn't show. We couldn't get up with a schedule, but it looks like he's saying that this stress card is used in training.
Yeah.
Because they're afraid that they're going to kill themselves later on.
Maybe so.
That is just backwards thinking to me. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Because when you deploy, it's going to be a hell of a lot worse than it is in basic training.
I think the concern and the sentiment is we're not, maybe And again, I'm not a professional and expert in military training, so the sentiment that some would have is that they're not being prepared. We're just not being prepared.
Okay, so now you're saying that perhaps if the training were ramped up, they'd be prepared more so when they got there.
In whatever form or fashion. I'm going to suggest that's not quite going to affect suicide rates and PTSD experience or trauma reactions.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Now, I would submit to you what might make an impact is such that I know they do in Navy SEAL training now, where they literally teach what some of those unbeatable mind practices that you have in your programs have been instituted to help people get through trainings. And I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
Right. So if we did a lot of those types of things, maybe we can make an impact to this right from the get-go. But I'm not going to try to comment on all that because that's beyond my scope of expertise.
Right. You know that I have read that the Spartans, the Spartans, right?
Mm-hmm. The
Spartans used to pray for war because they knew that war would be easier than their training.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, that's I've heard that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
They trained so hard that war was a piece of cake.
Interesting. I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that. I could believe that because I mean, if you're going to be in the thick of something, I'd rather be in something worse in a controlled environment than in the thick of it worse than I was trained. How about that for a statement?
Yeah. So what's the
right?
Yeah.
Let me say that again because I think that occurs to me right as we're talking. I would rather be trained in a controlled environment in something that's worse than what I'm probably going to be faced when I'm live.
Yeah. There's another saying too I've heard, and it could be a SEAL thing, I don't know, but the saying goes, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in war.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they would really support what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
In people that have been in it.
Yeah, that stress card thing blows my mind. I wish we could get. I'd love to try to continue to get this fella to come and speak with us. So, Chris, let me jump back to that other question. How do you treat this, man? If I come into your office and I'm a vet and I say, I've done terrible things, I've seen terrible things, and man, I don't know how to keep going in my life. What do you do?
It's an excellent question. Let's talk about what the things are seen, and let's get into some details with that, and then how we manage it in a therapy experience when we come back from the break. Sound interesting?
Yeah.
So we have a break for therapist helper. I'm sorry, geez. That flashes back, doesn't it? Therapisthelper.com.
Well, yeah, we used to have those guys. I hope they're still listening.
Yes, sir. I hope they are too. We can come back and support the show. But no, we have betterhelp.com, betterhelp.com. That is our sponsor currently, who is online therapy services with anyone across the country. It is primarily video and teleconferencing therapy practice that is something to be done through our website. We do get a financial ticket from every time that you do that through atherapisteyes.com. You click on the counseling button and you will go through a brief survey, and they will match you up specifically with what I now believe after the pandemic, or actually going through the pandemic, is an excellent service, teletherapy services. Craig, I used to think that was not a good service.
I remember.
Now I do, and I've done it and had great success, and some of my most productive sessions have been on the telephone, and I would have never thought that even months ago. So check them out through our website, through therapisteyes.com, click the counseling button, and go to BetterHelp Teletherapy Services. Back to the show here with your question, Craig. What? Go ahead and hit it again.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, how do you help somebody who's been in situations like that? I walk into your office and say, man, I've seen and done horrible things, and I'm thinking about, whatever these soldiers say to you. I mean, how do you help them, man?
So here's what I want to do with that. I want to get a little bit clearer, and this is where I said I'm not talking about anybody individual, but I'm talking about examples of things that I have heard, and I want us to really get in there and understand like how people experience this when they come home in very real ways, because it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around if you just haven't experienced it, right? And then I want to go into how do we try to manage that? And what are we trying to accomplish in that? Before I do that, I wanted to do a better job. I found my show notes on the Navy Chappie that I like to call him Chappie. You know him. It's
Oh yeah,
John.
yeah,
Yeah,
no,
John.
yeah, no, John.
And
Hello, John, if you're listening, buddy.
yeah, man. He said he served with Marines, and he agreed that the card was stupid. By the way, he was like, "Dude, this is just what."
Well, the Marines are part of the Navy, right?
The Marines are part of the Navy.
Yes.
Well, it's a different branch, but
they're a part of the Navy.
What do you mean by that? Maybe
I probably should look that up before I say that, so I don't want any Marines
yeah,
coming after me.
It's a different branch, bro.
I think that's right, guys. Don't know it, and if it's not, I'm sorry. But anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so he said he served with Marines and it doesn't agree from his experience that this is how the Corps is run. So he's kind of saying, like we were saying, like what is that? He didn't think that's the way it was run, but he this is where he was also talking about going deeper into therapy, with the vets rather than it tends to be more, in his word, superficial into VA. That's what I was trying to say before, and I think I butchered that up, so I wanted to go back to that. Look, think about this, Craig. When you're in theater, there's a lot of downtime. It's a fast, furious pace when stuff's happening, and then when it's not, you have a lot of time to think, and and you're training and you're doing things. But when you hit onto an event, your brain just like has a system, the amygdala. We talked about it, fight or flight. It just sears its way into the threads of what you see and what you experience in a very visceral way, right? Like, you ever heard the statement, you can't unsee what you see?
Oh, yeah.
You can't unhear what you hear.
Yep.
You can't unsmell what you smell. As a matter of fact, somebody was talking to me one time. I don't think it was a client, it might have been, but one of the most horrific things that this person could describe experiencing was actually in the National Guard. And that is the distinct and horrible smell of recovering a lost person from the sea.
Wow.
Now, that is a searing, traumatic event that you can't unsmell. And he would experience that again whenever you feel, smell other smells, like you walk through garbage or whatever. We've all smelled nasty stuff in our kitchen sink, right? That would flash back. So you actually re-experience smelling that horrible smell of a fully decomposed person being pulled in the National Guard. So you think of the Marines, you think of the Army, you think of the infantry person. Our men and women that are serving in the National Guard have stuff going on.
Yeah.
Okay? The Coast Guard. I've been saying National Guard. I meant Coast Guard, right? The National Guard as well. I mean, you go to flood victims' homes and you come across some rough stuff, right? In Operation Enduring Freedom and in our charge in shock and awe and the things that you experienced in these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, I mean, one of the things several people always seem to experience the same: roadkill, right? Roadkill is the way that all kinds of IEDs were hidden. And many people have been on roadside bombs. And guess what happens when you come home? You're going down to the grocery store, and you're getting chicken for dinner, and you come across a roadkill animal. How are you going to... That, boom, it pops you. I mean, you're ready to go swerve to the other side of the road, man, and people have startle reactions, right? Glints and glimmers, sniper situations. In your known sniper zone, and you see a tall building up there, and that glimmer of light. You know what that means because your guy just got hit. So now you're in downtown Charlotte. You're just cruising down there, getting ready to go to Capitol Grill, have an awesome meal. Sunny day, you happen to look up, boom, that glimmer. It takes you back. That's the real experience that people are having. And you might notice them get weird for a second, or whatever, and you might not even notice them doing that because it's the major attempt is to hide that. The major attempt is to shut those things down. The major attempt is to not Who wants to sit there and tell their wife, "Oh yeah, I just saw a glimmer up in the sky and it freaked me out." Yep, that's what happened to me. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, nobody.
Or who wants to tell their buddy, "Oh, I was driving down the road and I just had a flinch startle reaction because I saw a dead possum on the road," and then, okay, mm, right? I'm not going to tell you that because then I'm going to have to be talking about it. I'm not going to want to talk about it because then I'm going to experience it. And I know what happens when I experience it is I feel really, really bad. And I don't want to feel really, really bad. Thus, PTSD main area number 2, avoidance, right? Avoidance. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to drive down the road. Sometimes it's so bad that agoraphobia gets developed, honestly, and people don't want to leave their houses.
Agoraphobia? What is that?
Agoraphobia is not having intense anxiety whenever you leave, even the home, right? So you end up getting kind of suffocated in your living space. You just stay there, and that's more severe. Most people are able to get out and manage this, but can you imagine your heart racing and your eyes bugging out and your blood pressure shooting up? I mean, you might start shaking. I mean, you might have panic attack feelings. And you literally are going to a festival in downtown Charlotte. Right? That's it. And if it doesn't get treated, that doesn't get better.
Yeah. Yeah, I was reading a book called Resilience. A Navy SEAL had written it. His name is Eric Greitens. And the book was based on a series of letters that he exchanged with somebody he was in the SEAL teams with who was having these kind of issues. And the guy realized that he needed some help. He came home at some point during the day and got out of his truck and thought that there was a sniper stalking him. So he laid under his truck for hours until he finally was able to slide into his house.
Yeah.
And when he got into his house, he's like, "What in the hell am I doing?"
Right.
And then he realized that he needed some help, and he reached out to this fella. And
that's awesome that he realized that, because honestly, people can run a really long time. Like, the human being is a resilient creature. We are really created resiliently in an amazing way. So we can withstand all kinds of psychological, mental horrors and be alone with it.
Yeah.
But again, maybe it's a reoccurring theme for some reason in my brain tonight. If it doesn't get treated, it doesn't get better.
We are incredibly resilient, but we're going to lose that if we keep doing things like these stress cards and stuff like that. Jeez.
Stuck on that.
I hate to keep going back to that, but that's just crazy.
Yeah, it really is. I know. I get it. I get it and agree. Let me see. How do they cope with that if they're not doing treatment? So you have an idea, Craig, of what do we do in the office when we're trying to help this situation? Well, what people fall into traps with is avoidance as a big factor of PTSD. Also, negative thoughts and beliefs, right? I'm trying to cope with this, but all I see is the world as a horrible place. Death, destruction, turmoil, irritability, anger, sadness. I'm hanging out with my buddies, and they have this trouble with their marriages. I'm hanging out with my colleagues and they just, get irritated at work. Like, life begins and now the depression stuff kicks in, right? Life begins to get real negative and dark if it doesn't get treated. And that can actually subterfuge down a hole where, again, it doesn't get better. In fact, you might even be able to make the statement, without treatment, it actually can get worse. Right?
Yeah, I'm sure it does, right? That's why they take their lives.
Yes. Because remember here now, right? Suicidality happens not because somebody wants to end their life, really. Very, very, very rarely is that the case. Suicidality, or following through and actually completing the act, happens because generally a person feels like they have tried everything they know to do to be better. And I know I can't continue like I am. So if I know I can't continue like I am, and I've tried to do everything I know to do and feel better, then I have no other options but to end my life. You see? And if any military or first responder or anybody out there, even with just trauma of any sort, is hearing this, you can never get to trying enough things. There's an endless combination of mental health and psychological things to do. So reach out and find those things, find and figure those things out, because you can't get to the point where you don't have any other options. It's almost not possible is what I'm trying to say, right? Right. So does that give you a little bit of an image and a reality base to what somebody, will experience?
Yeah. I think you did a great job.
Did all right with that?
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to pull together all these different things that I've talked with people to give you a little bit of an encapsulation, just kind of, again, the name of the show, right through my eyes. So what do we do with this? Well, we don't want to drink, gallons of liquor. We don't want to go become hypersexual or destructive coping mechanisms and buy stuff we can't afford, or just yell at people and be irritable, because that's what happens a lot of times, right? What do we want to do? You know what I want to kind of maybe suggest, Craig, going back to your question and directly answering it? Tell the story. Right? That is one of the big things that begins to release the isolation that people feel, begins to release the pain that is had, right? Begins to release the chronic and constant experiences that you have. You can begin to get away from being alone with it. You simply want to be able to tell your story. And you know what happens a lot of times, unfortunately? A person will feel like, well, I'm going to tell my story. Sure, I'll tell my story to my boys. Guys in the unit, that's my family. That's who understands this. Or people behind the blue line, that no one can understand what we're dealing with, so we're going to tell each other. That's great. That is awesome. I do not have any problem with that. But if you have sexual molestation issues from your uncle from the age 5 to 12, you might think the same thing. And I would submit to you that if you share your story in that type of a sexual trauma, people can kind of understand. They don't understand your experience. No one understands your experience. But you explain that to them, you share that with them, and they can kind of relate. They can kind of be there with you. They can hear your descriptions. They can be compassionate and engage you with a conversation. That absolutely can happen, right? So it's a bit of a myth I'd like to blow up.
Do you think, though, that situations like sexual abuse are as easy to talk about? If I've been in war with a man, and I'm having problems with it, I can say, hey, man, I'm having this is going on. If I'm a dude who's been raped, I'm probably not going to tell a soul about that, man.
Well,
I'm going to be ashamed and embarrassed and everything else.
There's a lot of shame and embarrassment because I should be tougher than this, and I shouldn't be upset because I was a cook in Kuwait.
Exactly.
Wait, you didn't hear me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right? There's a lot of shame and embarrassment because I'm experiencing PTSD and freaking out all over the place when I go down to the city of Charlotte, and I was a cook in Kuwait, right?
Yeah, okay. But I'm saying if you've been shot at and, out in the thick of the firefight and you're having these kind of issues.
Here's what I'm trying to say. When you're experiencing this, the genesis of the trauma and your ability to easily share it doesn't matter. I don't think it really matters. You can get equally as locked down because of your own guilt, your own shame, your own fear, your own reactions that don't make sense, that you don't think you can explain to other people, right? And what you find is, there's no such, I guess I might put it this way. There's no such thing as mild trauma experience, right? Or, I don't know if I'm saying that right. There's no such thing as an event that triggers a mild trauma. The event doesn't matter. It's the eye of the beholder, right? You might experience trauma from breaking a rib when you're giving CPR. All you did, that happens a lot.
Yeah. I guess I was just thinking about how some issues might be easier to talk about with your buddy than others.
Remember when we talked about compound trauma?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
One trauma event is pretty easy to manage, even if it's absolutely horrific. Where you run into really big trouble is when you got one after the other. And that begins to be compounded. and it begins to be even more and more and more difficult. So it's not really the event as much as it is it compounded, or is it just singular? Because singular, you don't have as much, backlog of experiences. But when this happens over and over and over again, like every time you go out on, on a mission, every time you go down, that road in Sadr City, every time you go hit, that particular mountain regime, in Afghanistan, over and over and over again, it kind of starts to just sear its way into the amygdala. It fires and it fires again and it fires again and it fires again. Well, if you've got 7, 8 good firings of the same type of thing, how deeply do you think that sears in? That's kind of what we are looking at that makes it difficult. Not, was it a knifing? Was it a bomb? Was it a hangnail? That's a little silly, but does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah, maybe.
I think so. Yeah.
All right. So there's a lot of other things that we're trying to kind of get to. I guess that's what struck me, though, when you think about what do we do with, with this, and there's a lot to kind of managing the, the hypervigilance and getting control with breath and breathing and with your blood pressure and your heart rates and, losing breath and breathing when you have panic reactions and startle reactions. We try to flood into a situation. So if you're, afraid of driving down the road and seeing the roadkill, we want to kind of do a lot of self-talk and kind of a lot of reassurance, get support and validation from other people around you that are loved ones or close people, buddies that can support you. They know what they're supporting because you told them, and you can get through that drive. You can get through that experience. Don't be alone is probably big number 2. So tell your story. Don't be alone. And then thirdly, when you tell your story, you get to redefine it. You can re-understand what happened to you when you re-experience it in a different way, particularly, traumas of domestic violence or whatnot. So I think that's the simplistic way I'm going to answer it is tell your story. Don't be alone. You can redefine it.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you some questions about redefining it. So there's a thing called recapitulation. And
yeah.
Maybe this is part of the therapy world and maybe not, but you would go into a meditative state and relive past events. And there's processes that you can use to come to terms with those events and perhaps release some of that stuff. What are your thoughts on that, man? Is that a tool that you use in the therapy world?
It's exactly the same thing.
Interesting.
Absolutely. That's your coaching stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Very interesting.
Right. When you're yeah, go ahead.
Is that part of CBT or what is that? Or is that just a tool in your?
Tool in a tool bag, I guess.
Yeah,
tool in a tool bag.
So it's not part of cognitive behavioral therapy or anything like that. It's just a. And do you take people through those kind of processes in your office? Really?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, because they're into I mean sometimes I've had people that are actually re-experiencing it right in front of me, and I'll even pull out a little EMDR. Not that I'm a certified EMDR therapist, but I can use it. One guy, I was working with him, and he was special forces actually, and he looked at me, he's like, "Wow, what just happened?" I was like, yeah, I know, it's cool, isn't it? Oftentimes it's not as effective as that, but for him it was like, boom, like I just experienced that totally differently. I'm like, okay, we're de-escalating the energy, we're de-escalating the startle responses, we're de-escalating the blood pressure, we're de-escalating the memory.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Love it.
Yeah, it really is cool stuff. That's why I say, I mean, it's a tremendous honor to work with people when you have, moments like that and successes. But we got to get treated. We started out, let's kind of revisit back, our guy's quote, right? Soldiers are suicidal due to not being treated, meaning mental health treatment, not because of how they're treated, certainly in training, right? It's not the events that we can do anything about anyway. We have to have military engagements. It's that we don't have treatment. And I think we need to taxi in a little bit here, Craig, and I think I want to, end out on kind of some of the thoughts that you made me think of when you stopped me kind of cold a little bit. But what have you heard? What are you thinking? Further questions, thoughts, whatnot? What's going through your mind?
Well, I don't think I have any I don't think I ever have any huge questions. But do you think, maybe I do have one question, but do you think that, again, I think there's a stigma against therapy,
Yes.
and do you think that
Unfortunate.
that's something these military veterans are facing, is the
Yeah.
stigma of admitting they need help?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very, very strong point. And totally unnecessary. I mean, look, this, you've talked about it before, and I know you've read a lot and talked to people in special operations, and we need to get Commander Mark Devine on this show, man, to talk about that.
That'd be cool. Mark has a foundation called the Courage Foundation.
Yeah.
And he specifically for veterans who are committing suicide to stop veteran suicide.
Tell us a little bit about that and how to get that.
The Courage Foundation, I'll have to look up the links and have Neil put them in the notes. But I think look up Courage Foundation Mark Devine and you'll find it. But it's an organization, it's a nonprofit that its mission is to stop soldier suicide.
Yeah. And by reaching out.
Yeah, and folks, if you are listening to this and you think that therapy's for wimps, I listened to several Navy SEALs besides Mark on the internet. Sean Ryan's one, David Rutherford's one, and they talk about therapy and how important it can be for veterans and everybody for that matter. But Sean Ryan has a huge following on YouTube and Instagram, and he's got a video on YouTube specifically about how to find a therapist,
Awesome.
And this guy was a Navy SEAL, deployed to, Afghanistan. He served in the CIA afterwards. This is a badass.
Right.
This guy's a badass.
Right.
And he's talking about how to find a therapist, man.
Yeah.
So there's no shame in it at all.
It has gotten better, Craig. I will be straightforward and kind of saying, there's a lot of experiences that people have had. That was Neil popping my phone. Sorry.
Yeah, the Courage Foundation is feedcourage.org. That's feedcourage.org. And that's Mark Devine's organization. And he is the guy that certified me as one of his coaches. So check that out, how you might get involved there on feedcourage.org.
That's awesome. What I was saying is, it's gotten a little better, Craig, in the idea that I used to not really be able to see in my therapy office a black man, very rarely. And I'm able to see, Hispanic men are probably still, I don't get to see a whole lot of those.
Is that because there's a stigma there?
The cultural stigmas,
really?
the cultural stigmas in what you would say heritage cultures, I guess, but in policing cultures, in first responders cultures, and in military culture, I think there is absolutely a stigma that you are weak if you can't hack it. If you can't hack it, then get your rucksack and go home and cry. Right? And that's not going to get it done.
A good friend of ours who's been on the show, named David Shaw. Hopefully he's listening. But David's a Christian, and he said he used to think church was for people who couldn't handle it until he realized he couldn't handle it. So you might change that to say, I used to think therapy was for people who couldn't handle it until I realized I couldn't handle it.
I like it. I like it. It's absolutely true. And honestly, man, I think the point here is that no one can really handle it. Like, we are not designed physiologically to experience that kind of trauma over and over again. What we do to ourselves and to each other is crazy. It's crazy stuff.
Yeah, and if you are out there listening and you do have that stigma, maybe you reframe it to an emotional coach. You're going to go find yourself an emotional coach, and to get some help, not a therapist.
Absolutely.
Mark Devine said if we called it emotional coach, everybody'd go.
Oh, wow. Okay, we'll go on. That I could go in my brain for a long time there with that, but let's cycle in for a landing, Craig.
And I do want to clarify something.
Go.
The Marine Corps is a part of the Department of the Navy. I looked it up. History.com has an article. It's pretty cool. 7 things you may not know about the U.S. Marine Corps. Maybe I'll shoot this to Neil and have him include it too. But number 5, the Marine Corps is part of the Department of the Navy. While the Marine Corps is its own branch of the U.S. military, it falls under the administration of the Department of the Navy.
dropping some knowledge.
Yeah, so hopefully no Marines will come after me.
That's good.
Because I was right.
That's awesome. That's good. Yeah, man. I just, you stunned me, I guess, a little bit halfway through there, Craig, when you're kind of like, look, it's been 20 years since the war started.
Yeah, 20 years, man, and our veterans still can't get help. And another point I thought about is I think a lot of people are waiting for the government to come and save them from COVID or whatever it is. And here we have these veterans who've put their lives on the line, who've bled, died, affected their families, and man, they've been suffering for 20 years, and nothing's happening with the VA. What makes us think the government is going to fix our problems?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I don't even know what to say again. You kind of hit me speechless again because it's kind of why I feel so honored and humbled to be able to talk with people in therapy across the board, let alone military people. Because it's just when like I said before, man, when people are sharing something with me that I've become aware that they haven't shared with anybody else ever. I tell you, there was this one person, Craig, early on in my career that kind of hit me. We were talking about, how do I be careful? I mean, it's been many years, so I'm sure I'm not, breaking confidentiality or anything like that, I think. He was here because of irritability on his job. Older guy, kind of pushing towards retirement. I'm like, okay, well, what's going on with irritability at the job? And I start doing my assessment and everything. I kind of begin figuring out, yeah, it's trauma stuff. And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah, maybe so, We start talking about some specifics and stuff. Do you know he started talking to me about things that he experienced in VA, and this guy I told you was in retirement age. How long had he been walking around with all this stuff that he experienced in the Vietnam War to the point that he talked to me?
So he was in Vietnam. He had trauma in Vietnam, and it was affecting him
all
30 years, 40 years later.
All his life.
Wow.
All his life.
Wow.
And we began to deal with the trauma. We began to deal with the experiences and whatnot. And one of the successes, it almost made me cry. One of the successes, he was able to have a picnic with his friends from work that were new friends and his family and his kids and stuff that he hadn't talked to for such a long time.
Yeah, just think about that. If you're suffering, just think about how your life could be different, how it could be better. I mean, that should be enough right there to put you in the seat.
And the beautiful thing is I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
I've literally walked through and experienced that process happen with people. It's awesome. It's awesome, and it needs to happen. It needs to happen. It needs to start happening with more regularity, so we don't have these, these issues with these mental health issues and suicides and such. Man, it just does.
I agree. Get some help, folks. We care about you. That's why we're here. And get some help.
All right, so what we're going to talk about next time when we kick the mics back on next week is a follow-up really to this. It's kind of a different angle on a lot of the same stuff. How do you be in relationship with somebody who does experience or has experienced trauma? Because there's a large family component here, man. There's a large family and marriage component with how you're managing that. So strap yourselves in. Let's stay with this trauma issue next week, and we'll figure that part of all this out also.
One more thing I wanted to say before we go. If you're in the state of North Carolina, I'm assuming that you could call Chris's office and do a telesession, or you could use BetterHelp on our website. If you're not in North Carolina, Chris is only licensed in our state.
Correct.
And you could get therapy right out of the comfort of your own home.
Yes.
It's so easy. So easy. So take advantage of that, folks.
It's a good point. Through therapisteyes.com, you go to the counseling button and you can do that. And that's not a sales pitch, man. That's like a good point, Craig. It is. You can do that right from where you're sitting at right now, literally. And I'm glad you did that. All right, guys. We love talking to you, man. Hang with us. We're going to talk to you next week.